God damn it! Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're correct there.
What was that?
It's not been working.
It's on now. Damn it! That sucks.
All right. Whatever. I mean, just boring.
I think
privilege.
there's sort of a difference between being homosexual and then having beliefs about other people that would lead to treating them in morally abhorrent ways.
But if they
Like,
don't
I don't
actually
think that
treat
being-
them in morally abhorrent ways, then what grounds do you have to fire them? They can believe. I mean, that's where
because-
you're getting into thought
that's
crime.
a question. We're talking about what is going to occur in the future, which has to be an inference. We can't know that.
We
can know that someone has, up to this point, not done anything based on their beliefs. We also know that beliefs are motivations for actions. So there are some beliefs that we can infer would lead to actions that we would find bad.
Okay,
in
well,
certain
a lot of
contexts
Muslims believe that the true law, they should be able to kill apostates. They don't in America because they respect the land of. It's the same. How is that different? I mean, how is that different? If your point is beliefs lead to actions, then I mean, to me that sounds like thought crime. To me, that sounds like you are trying to predict a crime before it happens.
You're not criminalized for having the thought. You're just excluded from the workplace. Those are different things.
I have a question. Like, why can't we just let work be work?
Yeah,
like, you go in there, you clock in, you do the job.
Because there are other people there.
You don't mess with other people there. You just do your job, and then it's found out.
If you work in a place where there's no collaboration necessary, then I guess you could make that argument, and it could be plausible. But
why should you dictate the terms over which what is acceptable in terms of collaborating? Why do you get to determine that? I mean,
well, unfortunately, in our current economic paradigm, there's no democracy for employees, and it's a dictatorship. So, I mean, if you're asking why the boss should get to choose, then you gotta go ask Adam Smith.
But the boss doesn't. The boss doesn't get to choose.
Yeah, it's like government laws, right?
You can't fire someone.
It's not just
what they want, right? Yeah.
I mean,
there are laws that regulate what bosses can do, but the bosses have a lot more power over what the business can do, and the bosses have the means, or are more likely to have the means, to get the government to change the rules so that they can do what they want.
Where's your evidence of that? I mean, they're not going to be able to change the law so that they
Look
can
at
fire
Flint.
gay people.
You can look at Flint is because of privatizing the industry, and the boss is trying to make more money, and then all of these people have terrible water and a bunch of huge health crisis.
Okay, but that's a completely different
that's
thing.
businesses making the decision.
That's industry. That's corporations.
All right.
And corporations.
Wait,
let me. Can I say a few things? Because so when people were talking about like, can you be fired for being a Nazi, and if you can, then why is that not the same as getting fired for being gay? Like, I think there's like a really important difference there. I mean, regardless of whether you think you should be able to be fired or not for like either reason, like, you should make the difference, right? Like, maybe you could say, if you can be fired for being a Nazi, then you should also be able to be fired for like being a liberal, right?
Sure. Or a socialist or communist. Let's say you're a communist.
But like what I'm saying, what I'm saying is that's not the same as being fired for being gay.
I'm not making the argument that they're the same. I'm not making the argument that they're the same. Well, my argument is you should only be able to be fired because of things you've done at work. So if you're making life difficult for other people who work there, that makes sense. But if you're not,
only for things you've done at work.
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness! I'm a serial killer in my private life.
Yeah.
So.
If you're a serial killer, you go to jail. They'll call it sure.
Well, they don't know that.
A straw man.
I don't know, man.
Okay, here's a question. Here's a question about the fired at work piece. Let's say you're a salesman, and on your work hours, you only dedicate your life to selling for that company. But then after work hours, you work for the competitor. That's not something you do at work, and that's something that hurts your business.
It affects your job. It affects your job.
Should you be able to be fired for that?
Sure, because it affects things at work. You have insider information, or you're potentially a risk because you're.
So if your beliefs affect things at work, you should be fired for them.
On actionable things, if you can see if there's something you can point to that says you are causing a problem at work for other people, then yeah, fire them. That's fine. But you can't
point to the losses when you go work for the other company. You can't necessarily point to those. Then can you not get fired for working for the competitor?
Wait, say that again. I have a hard time. I didn't follow that.
So in Arco's example, Arco was like, so if I go, when I get off work and I go work for the competitor, should I be able to get fired for that? And you said yes.
It depends. And you might have signed something when you got the job. You probably did. Like you probably signed something when you got the job. If you didn't, then they're not going to have any legal grounds to fire you. And if you want to press charges, you can.
Okay. I feel like this has very rapidly become not at all about the book.
I don't know. I think this is exactly what their argument is.
I think this gets to the crux of the concern.
Yes. I mean, they make this exact argument.
The world we want to live in?
Well, please point me to the argument.
Where liberals no longer care about workers' rights. That's what I've heard for about the last 10 to 15 minutes.
They point out that this is like, if this is acceptable for identitarians on the left, it will be acceptable for identitarians on the right, because you don't get to do that. You don't get to decide, well, my morality is the right morality. You don't get to do that. It's just, that is what separation of church and state is for. You don't get to do that.
It's not just that. There's, the times that these people are getting fired, the justifications that their bosses are using are not, oh, my morality. No, they're appealing to like laws, like this anti-discrimination laws.
Sure. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. You like, if you find out that some manager you have didn't hire somebody because they were gay, not only would I fire them, I'd call the police, because that's illegal. Like you should be punished for that. Like
take this man to jail.
No, I mean it's probably some kind of a fine or something. I don't know what it would be, but either way, yeah, sure. If you're breaking the law, fine. But I don't think.
Well, my point being, it's not just like people. These things aren't just morality. The ones where you see people just like, intervening because of their morality, these are things like that are going to get grouped under cancel culture.
What about James Damore?
So James Damore, they fired him because they interpreted what he said as sexist, discrimination against women.
But it wasn't.
I haven't read what he said, so I don't know. I haven't read what he said.
Feedback.
First, he's probably autistic. That seems to be.
No, I think they say that's true. Yeah.
So is that discrimination? They fired him for the way he looks at things, because he looks at things systematized like that. He doesn't look at it.
You cannot conclude from the fact that he's autistic that it was the cause of his writing this memo in this way.
No, it's the way what he wrote is very clearly, he answered a question literally in the way an autistic person likely would answer a question. You asked a question and he answered it. He answered it in a way they didn't want him to.
So he could make this argument, but I'm just telling you, like it's not like a if A then B, A therefore B situation. This is not modus ponens. Like you have to do a little bit of assumption and inference to get to your conclusion. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying like it's not obviously 100% the case.
Well, yeah, and there's also
for this reason.
There's also the added element of like his being fired. Did that come from the scholarship in academia? Which is sort of, I think, the thesis of the book.
That is. I agree that they did not connect the dots in any fair way. But so Yanai asked in the chat, how is this related to book club? And I think it's deeply related, because I don't remember hearing anything about somebody being fired for having an opinion of why men and women are different and why you might have more men working than men until very recently. I never heard of that before.
It depends on what they said.
What do you mean?
You know, James Damore didn't say men and women are different.
Yeah, that's literally what he said. That's
he must have said more. He must have gone into these
You just said that you've never encountered, that you haven't actually looked into this.
You're proving to me my point. You're proving to me my point that this is a moral argument and that you have this is your value system because you've decided there's no.
I've
they
heard
must
people
have
talk
done
about
this.
it. I haven't read the data. I've heard people on his side
but
talk
that's
about
the point.
it.
All it is
I
is
haven't
data.
read it myself.
That's the point, though. All it is data.
It's not only data because he's using the data as an explanation for the differences between men and women. So it's not just data. It's like, here's data, and I'm interpreting the data to show this is why we see this description.
This is what he did. He said, here are what studies are showing are the differences between men and women and why maybe and he actually even said, I'm not a standard typical man. And here's some things that maybe would attract women to work here. Because of these trait differences, these are jobs that things that like people like me don't like to do, that it seems like maybe women would be more likely to do. And I don't know why that should be any kind of a problem.
Jimmy, we're getting so into the details of this case that we're not talking about the book anymore. Now this is about James Damore.
James Damore is brought up in the book, and it's absolutely fundamental to it.
No, I know. Dude, it's not absolutely fundamental. They mention him on 2 pages.
No, you guys said that that diversity training has been around forever. And I'm saying, okay, sure, but it's different now. And this is my evidence of that. This is my evidence of that.
He wasn't in a diversity training. This is not evidence for that.
Also, James Damore, if you're talking about doing things at work, James Damore sent a memo that heavily implies that his female co-workers aren't really as good as him, stuff like that. Stuff that is very
not heavily implied at all. That was never.
Listen. Let's not kind of like
you
try
guys
to break down.
No. The reason I'm not letting it go is because you're doing exactly what you've been accusing James, Lindsay, and Pluckrose of throughout this book now.
We can
you are making all sorts of. You are making all sorts of inferences that are untrue.
Dude, this is literally turning into a fucking James Damore webinar, dude. I'm not trying to fucking talk about James Damore for 45 minutes.
Okay. What do you want?
You realize why he brought it up, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, can you at least understand why it's connected and why it matters?
No, of course I understand why you brought it up, but like, there's a whole fucking chapter here, dude. There are other examples.
Okay. Let's keep going then.
I think we should move on then. Yeah.
So the first chapter, chapter 9, is social justice in action, and it's basically just a list of things that they attribute to social justice scholarship. I agree, they have not really done a great job. They should have been, the whole book should have been an attempt to connect these things they're outlining to social justice scholarship, and they didn't do that. They just talked about it and then attributed it to it in this chapter. That part I agree with you on. They did not do a good job.
So, yeah, I mean, I just don't know, like, I don't know where to go. Okay, so they spend like the first page and a half, basically 2 pages of the chapter saying like, oh, there's, things are changing. We got these activists at the universities going crazy. A comedian lost his job at BBC for not realizing that a photograph of a chimpanzee in a smart coat and bowler hat could be construed as racist. Yeah, he got his job back. Okay. But they actually say, given the rise of demagoguery, populism, nationalism, and anti-intellectual currents on the right, who currently hold political power in the US and UK, and the growth of far-right movements all over Europe and beyond, should we really be worrying about a few people getting overzealous in support of equality? Maybe there's some shouting, some milkshake throwing, but far-right terrorism is on the rise, and online communities of the far right alt-right, and incels are proliferating and fomenting vastly more serious acts of violence. So shouldn't the lefties focus their attention over there? And they say, okay, this is a fair objection, so let's answer it. Basically, their whole chapter is going to be like a justification of why it's warranted to spend as much time focusing on this issue, at least, as it is to focus on the right. So they say that the problem, this is page 215, there's a problem, it begins in our universities and it comes down to social justice. The most immediate aspect of the problem is that social justice scholarship gets passed down to students who then go out into the world. Wow. The effect is strongest within social justice fields, which teach students to be skeptical of science, reason, and evidence. Remember, they're backing this up with the bullshit scholarship and bullshit citations from the previous chapter. And they tell them to read oppressive power dynamics into everything, to politicize. Okay. And they say, well, you might think, well, once they graduate, it'll be fine, right? They'll mature, they'll grow up, and they'll face the real world. But they say, no, what if they simply take their beliefs into the professional world and remake that world to suit them? So I think what they're implying here is that actually the changes that we see in HR departments and, in workplaces across the corporate and the working world more generally, this comes from new hires or people working their way up in companies having been a gender studies major or something like that. I mean, that's what this paragraph is telling me.
I don't know that it's saying that. I don't think it's making that direct a line. It's saying that it has infected the culture to the point where
beliefs into the professional world and remake the world to suit them. Unfortunately, this is exactly what's happening.
Well, the question would be, like you guys brought up earlier, that the Twitterverse is probably a better place to find where this kind of thing is coming from. But how did it get there is another question. I don't think they're making a claim that everybody who's gone to these companies came out of a gender studies course.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. And no, they're not saying that. They're not saying that every single person who is employing these things. I mean, they frequently use the metaphor of a virus, right? So presumably there are some people who are infected who know they're infected, and they pass it on to other people who get infected and don't even know. And that seems to be the way that they want to describe
it. They also seem to have this kind of top-down causation at the university level. Professors who have tenure have these ideas which teach their students these ideas, and then the students take those ideas and just regurgitate them until finally it becomes their own, and then they bring them out into the workplace. But I don't think that's how scholarship works in an academic setting. Usually students have a project they want to do that they're focused on, and they have someone guiding them through that project. They're not required to do something based on certain ideas, and the person who's helping them, if they're a good teacher, is going to be telling them how to do their project correctly, or to do it with the highest rigor or the best methodology. So it seems to me more likely to be the case is that our culture at large has these views and beliefs. Students in that culture go to college. When they're at college, they're doing projects on these things that are coming up for them, that are topical. And the teachers there are helping the students have a method of going into that research and scholarship. So I don't think that it's just top down of tenured professors telling the students what to do, but it's more like reciprocal causation. The teachers and the students are impacting each other. So those who have tenure are starting to do projects that maybe the students are bringing to them as well and changing their ideas. And because these teachers have a bigger platform or a louder voice, it seems like they're the ones who are the originators of these ideas in our culture. But it might actually be more like it's just sort of a parallel thinking that came up. It's in the zeitgeist, and then the scholarship is looking at what's in the zeitgeist.
That makes more sense. Yeah. That does make I feel similarly hesitant to sort of blame professors or blame any specific thing, but I can't deny, like, I just talked to a friend who is 24 years old and she just went to college for the first time, and she already, like, and it's Zoom, and already she's like talking about how racist America is. She never talked like that before. Never talked like that before. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm really learning a lot. I'm learning how racist America is and how I was just like, oh my God, you're making me believe that there are magic words that just infect people's minds. I don't actually believe that, but I don't think it's just coincidence that people go to college and suddenly have more radical ideas. Part of it's understandable. I mean, it's where you go to have radical ideas. It's what university is for, in a way. I mean, but on the other hand, that's a radical idea that has less to do with thinking about things and more to do with prescriptions for the world. And
are you sure? I'm not so sure about that. I mean, my experience, right? You would probably say that I went to university and was radicalized in some sense, at least with respect to my views about racism in America. But really, I just was taught jack shit about the history of race in the United States in my junior year U.S. history class, where the rough trajectory of what we were taught about race relations in the United States was like, there was slavery, that was really bad, but then Lincoln freed the slaves, and that was good, and then there was Jim Crow, and that was pretty bad, but then Martin Luther King did his thing, and then we got rights, and things have been pretty much good since then.
I mean, I mostly agree with you that we don't teach the Civil War properly. We don't teach about Jim Crow properly.
We don't teach Jim Crow. Yeah, we don't teach all sorts of shit.
But I wasn't saying that she went to school and school radicalized her. I'm saying that she went to school, and most people who go to college experiment with more radical ideas. That's natural. It's a natural. It makes sense that you would do that because, in a way, it's what university is for. It's a place for you to think unhinged and not really have to worry about greater society or something. I'm gonna turn my camera off because everything's slowing down.
Oh no, is it me because I joined?
I don't know, but I'm gonna turn mine off because maybe that will speed it back up.
Turn mine off. Can I have a comment? I mean, may I speak?
Of course.
I'm new. Hi guys.
Where'd you go?
So I actually with regards to the radicalization of students, I've spoken with a professor. I have a little podcast where I kind of do IDW type searching things, and so I spoke to a professor named Jeffrey Sachs, and he has done research in this area about radicalization and whatnot, and that it is not through the professors. There's conclusive evidence through, like, I don't remember exactly, like, statistics or what he has, like, he told me in an interview I had with him that it's not the professors who are radicalizing, it's the people who go in are already in that political space or cultural space. They can be further radicalized by ideas, but they already had those leanings in the first place.
I don't find that hard to believe. That makes
my experience in college was similar, where it was a lot of the said ideas were more from students who are actively participating in more politically active clubs and organizations.
Yeah, like if I could speak to my own college experience, especially because I was in college from 2010 to 2014, so the very tail end of my college years is when this SJW stuff really started to take off on campuses. My campus was no exception, especially because we had a Confederate monument on the campus that was torn down a couple years ago. But one thing I noticed was that most of the radicalism that I saw was among the students, and that the professors, even the professors who I'm sure were devout liberals, had pretty muted influences from that in their lectures. Like, and I did a political science major, so there's plenty of room for them to check biases. And there's so many things that they could have said. There's so many times that they could have ragged on conservatives that they didn't. That was one thing that stood out to me. It was very different than what I had heard from people like, oh, the liberal professors are going to brainwash the kids, because some people in North Carolina, especially in the rural part of the state, they like Carolina, like, because it's a legacy school in the state, but then they're worried that some of the professors there will get in their heads. By and large, I didn't see that. By and large, I saw most of the craziness coming from students themselves. And my guess is that they were probably already like that coming in to some extent, and maybe just the context of college was a catalyst to that kind of behavior. But I don't know if I could squarely put it on the professor.
Yeah, my experience was similar. Like the by far the people with the most radical political beliefs that I knew in college were my peers. And I think that what I witnessed in college was basically sort of people come in with whatever views they come in with, and then once people sort of settle into social groups, there's a sort of like magnetization where people sort of go more towards, if their whole friend group is further left than they are, then they're going to go further left. If by contrast they're the only kid who like had conservative parents, and they might think that they're on the left, but they don't have all these views that their peers have, well then they might go further left with their peers. So like some students will get radicalized and go further in the direction they already are, or could even go the complete opposite direction from what they came in as. But also, I know several people who came in sort of libertarian / conservative, and then by the time they graduated, they were pretty like decently left of center. I went to UC Santa Barbara, so very liberal climate, but so I don't think it's not like they are citing statistics here on how much students get radicalized. A lot of the strength of the argument comes from sort of appeals to intuition and references to specific cases, and the rhetorical force does not come from empirical rigor here.
That's funny. You just accuse them of a cardinal sin of their own religion.
Like even if we identify that the professors aren't the origin point, it doesn't change the fact that a lot of these students are in fact taking these things into the workplace, and whatever inconveniences that poses to the workplace, I don't think that's something that's being taken into consideration. At the very least, I would suspect that Lindsay and Pluckrose are sort of shedding light on that fact. Like, there is a cost to this coming into the workplace, where we can't simply let work be work, but work has to be politicized in some way.
So, right, this is a good transition, because the next point I was going to make was that they argue that one of the consequences of these people being either either volunteering for indoctrination or being brainwashed somehow, and then going on into the working world, is that they say the real world is changing to absorb the skills of such students, and a social justice industry already worth billions of dollars is forming. I take it this is like diversity training. All dedicated to training our companies and institutions to enact and police the truth according to social justice. Capital T for the truth. There's a lot of fucking petty capitalization.
I noticed that, but like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, dude.
The capital T truth. Are they coherentists? Are they foundationalists? Are they correspondents?
They're obsessed with the correspondence theory of truth. At least James Lindsay.
Yeah.
Oh my god! I hate that theory of truth. I hate it.
He doesn't even seem to be aware about like the coherence theory of truth, for example, because he has this weird like worldview in which there's the correspondence theory of truth, which is like the correct one, and it like
and postmodernism.
Knowledge is just like and postmodernism, and it's just like this complete divide where there's no in between, and like all the good ones are like on the correspondence theory of truth, and if you're not on the correspondence side, then you're like a complete cultural relativist, and you know. But yeah,
I totally agree. I think they are on this. I'm sorry, and I don't want to derail it. I'm using the word religion because it's the word I use for what I mean here.
Yeah.
They are. They don't know that this is their religion. They don't know that like for them, this is truth. Like correspondence truth is truth. That's how the way they see it. They don't see it that way, but it is what is what they're doing. I mean, they're treating their view as the truth. They're the ones doing that. They're saying everybody else is doing it, but they're the ones doing it.
Yep. Yeah.
Sam, I feel like your kind of standard of proof for influence in this specific segment is a little bit too high. So I think there are two ways to talk about like influence, like because we're talking about like students coming out of the university infecting the workplace or whatever. I think there are two ways to talk about something like this. You could demand like data, like data could be one way, but there's also like a way of talking about ideology, the same way that we say, you know, the way that men get represented in media then affects men. And we don't want to like go and look for like these silly studies where people watch a violent movie and they come out more violent, because that's like that way lies madness. So I feel like the thing that they fail to do is
I didn't mean to suggest that like I needed data or anything. Like I was just pointing out that it's not there. But sorry, I cut you off. You finish your point.
Yeah, I just feel like what they need here is not so much data or citations. What they need is to make the case for like what the connection is between these theories and like implicit bias training, which is flimsy, I would say, and you know, leaning on the earlier chapters that weren't that good.
I agree with that. I mean, that is how you attack this book, to me. If we start arguing like we just did, which is what I want to do, which is why I'm frustrated with this book, because the arguments I want to be having are like the ones that we just had, but I can't with this book because we're talking about this book, and this book just does not do a good job connecting the dots that it thinks it's connecting.
Right. It seems like at least what I was sort of taking from Sam was he was illustrating that the book has an argument, like it's a weak argument, that can only be strengthened as it currently is with something like data. Not that data is the only argument that would work for showing this to be the case. We could also make an inference and it would be a strong argument. But it seems like that's what I was sort of taking it as. It's like as the argument is currently presented, it's lacking data and it's lacking a bunch of these other pieces in between.
This is why Coddling of American Mind is a much better book.
Yes. In fact, I've been thinking during this discussion, it's like all of this is much better explained by the trends pointed out in Coddling of the American Mind.
I could not agree more, because they don't blame it on...
I've had that thought several times.
They don't blame it on the professors or the school. They have some issues with schools, but it more has to do with not standing up to kids, or you know, kind of capitulating to radicalized children who come into school with crazy ideas about things. Which is, it's fine to have crazy ideas about things, but when they start making demands, it kind of changes. And then having Greg Lukianoff on that, I really think helped a lot, because he talks about how there was a shift in when fire would go in to respond to a claim about free expression. It started being the professors who were the ones who needed to be defended. And that was a fundamental change around this time. So I just, it's hard for me to defend this book. I'm being more harsh with these chapters because I do agree with a lot of things they're saying in these chapters. However, I can't claim that this book defends them very well.
So, I mean, like clearly much of what they're saying is factual, but there are just these little, they sort of sneak them in often. It's like, you know, they'll explain a situation that happened. They'll explain, you know, some professor was shouted down, or some, you know, Ben Shapiro's speaking event was canceled because of student protests or whatever. And so like, yes, it's true that this happened, but then the next little sentence, you know, like, this is social justice ideology at work, right? With the capital S and the capital J, exactly as they've been describing it throughout this book. So, I mean, nobody's going to object that what they're pointing to is like, in the general colloquial sense, social justice ideology. And they use the capital S and the capital J, and they put their brand on it. And now it's a claim, sort of hidden. It's a hidden claim about what's really going on here, and it's tied to scholarship for them.
I think that you know, for example, the Ben Shapiro canceling or Milo Yiannopoulos being canceled at like Berkeley, UC Berkeley, for example. I feel like there might be some type of fallacy happening there. Just because it happened at Berkeley doesn't mean it's happening at every university around the country.
Well, there
Berkeley
is
is famous
also-
for being really, really liberal.
That, but
well, there is
Okay.
a lot of people saying like comedians won't go to colleges anymore, and they used to go to colleges a lot.
Well, also one thing that I think is potentially relevant here regarding, like, you know, because it happened at Berkeley, then it means it happened everywhere. So I went in grad school to the University of Chicago, which, you know, it's often like characterized as like the most extreme example in like the good IDW sense, right? Like, it's like super
free
pro
speech.
free speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, yeah, I do think, you know, free speech is respected at the University of Chicago, and like during the time I was there, like I think that's, you know, like a fair characterization. But then, like, I don't think it's not like the student body itself is like radically more, you know, like conservative or libertarian or whatever, right? Like, cause I remember this one time, there's like a conservative association called the Edmund Burke Society, and they were going to organize like a debate about, you know, the wall, like the border wall. And, you know, like, because they wanted to be kind of edgy, they framed the question in a way that could be seen like as offensive to Mexicans, right? And there was like this huge outcry from like a lot of students, like I would say a majority of students, against like the debate happening. I think it ended up happening, but like, you know, it's hard for me to, like, what I'm trying to get at is it's hard for me to imagine that if the University of Chicago is like the, you know, like the number one good one in terms of free speech, and like the student body is that way, like how bad can like the worst one be, right? Like,
I guess
there
so.
can't be that.
I don't understand how that's an infringement on free speech for a group of people to like protest something happening.
No, it's not right. Like, they're like, those guys have the right to have the debate, like the other people have the right to protest, right?
Right.
But then, like, you could say the same at Berkeley, right? Like, the students also have the right to like protest Milo Yiannopoulos, and if he wants to cancel, then like, you know, whatever, fine, that's like his prerogative. But my point is like, like I didn't. It's not like at the University of Chicago, like the supposed like super, you know, pro free speech one. There was like some kind of, you know, tacit agreement among all the students, like, oh, we're never going to protest any kind of like thing. Like, for example, Steve Bannon was invited to speak by a professor, and I think that one eventually got canceled because like the students got like really well, the students and even a lot of the professors were like, no, like, this is too far, like we can't have, you know, Steve Bannon coming here. But again, like, they were in the right to protest and say, like, you know, don't do this and whatever. Like, my point is, like, I don't think the the range of differing like opinions among like students and like how far they will go in one direction or another can be like that wide across like different campuses in the United States.
Yeah. So if their whole critique is like against that sort of thing happening, then I think, as Arco pointed out, they would need some sort of argument, right? Like, it's not an infringement on free speech for people to protest an event. And it seems like the way that this chapter is set up is that, like, not only is this a new trend of, students protesting until an event gets canceled, or, a person can't speak at an event or something, but this is like a serious problem. I mean, it seems like for these sorts of cases, it's going to come down to your actual particular moral beliefs about the cases. Like, I don't think that if, Richard Spencer were invited to a university, that Helen and James would have that much of an issue with students, protesting until the event was canceled. But then, okay, well, where's the line between Richard Spencer and Milo? Where's the line between Milo and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson? But that is not what we get here. And, maybe the chapter would have been more convincing if they had some way to address that point.
Yeah, I mean, this is going off topic, but my argument here is that just too many people are going to college, and a lot of people who shouldn't be in college, and that's not talking down. I don't think less of people. I just think there are people who, if you're going to college, it should be a place where you're expecting to be confronted with ideas that maybe bother you, and challenge you and make you think differently. And I think that if you're a type of person who feels threatened by that sort of discourse, then college isn't for you. And I do think our culture has a real problem with sending way too many people to college.
I would protest a Richard Spencer event in a college I don't attend. But
yeah,
in any case, I think the reason that this conversation kind of goes in all different directions is that I feel like here at the cusp of like this book, we see that the goal of this book is really confused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's confused because it's trying to do something that I think is a little bit cynical. It's kind of trying to cash in on the reaction people have to social justice and trying to give it kind of an intellectual, like working backwards. It tries to give it like an intellectual backing in a way, like to analyze how we can take that reaction and think of it as an intellectual movement. But they don't do enough of the work. Like that's a huge undertaking, and I am not optimistic about the chances of that undertaking, but that's just me. Someone who actually wants to do that should do the work seriously. And here I think they paper over a lot of these, a lot of the problems by just invoking some kind of, like invoking those social justice reactions. Like, aren't people getting a little bit crazy about race? Like, to kind of hide the fact that they haven't done their homework enough.
Yeah, I think that's a plausible hypothesis. Yeah, and one thing I thought you might have been leading up to, but I think is a little bit different, is like, you're talking about working backwards and sort of providing a sort of intellectual, I guess, decoration on it to make it more appealing, maybe more gratifying to the reader. But I was also thinking about like those social justice warrior cringe compilations that like people put on YouTube, and thinking about how this is just sort of one really long that with like, Tim Pool sprinkled in giving his commentary, but in word form or something like that. And that's a funny way to think about this book.
Well, the reason why I'm critical of this book is because I sort of agree that there's something about this that feels opportunistic. And as a person who is critical of a lot of this social justice stuff, I worry about the effects of it. If this is the way it goes, then it's going to be really hard for someone like me to not be grouped in with this type of thing. It's going to be
You're
harder.
saying that this is right-wing cringe. Like,
I don't know if it's right-wing cringe so much as
it's anti-left cringe.
I don't even.
It's being called
I just
reactionary centrists. That's what the people who I've seen who are frustrated with Lindsay on Twitter are calling the people, because they're not right-wing, but they feel right-wing because of how harsh they are against the far left or middle or whatever left they're talking about. And
I think that speaks more about the left than our right, though.
Okay.
If I can do a shameless plug here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
No, I didn't.
I was just gonna say, like, if I can do a shameless plug here, I wrote a piece exactly about the thing you were talking about, Andrea. Like, why do they say they're not right wing but they feel right wing? And I think like the entire thing is you can sort of like conceptualize their entire politics with like Carl Schmitt's concept of the political. Which, you know, Carl Schmitt was actually like a reactionary thinker, right? So, like,
reactionary, yeah.
I'd be interested in reading that, Nestor, if you want to.
You should share that in like the books channel or something.
Oh yeah. Let me
we'll put it in the information when this goes up.
Yeah.
So
one thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you guys are so.
Well, I was just looking at the chapter, and we're talking about what's happening on campuses and sort of the free speech aspect, and they have this paragraph about deplatforming, and maybe I could just read it.
What page is it on?
217.
Okay, I just want to follow along if I can.
So this paragraph goes, there have also been overt attempts to silence certain views on campus. No platforming policies for particular legal or political groups and certain public figures have become common, though they often fly under the radar. Certain views, academic views shared by professionals, are considered too dangerous or even violent to be allowed a platform. Unlike deplatforming drives, in which someone who has been invited to speak has that invitation rescinded, policies that disallow certain views in the first place attract little attention. In the United Kingdom, more than 50% of universities restrict speech, especially certain views of religion and trans identity. And one thing that kind of bugs me about that paragraph is it seems to me like there's an implicit premise there, which is there are no good reasons for the deplatforming of these beliefs or ideas. And because there's no good reason, that it's just done based on ideological grounds, and it's unjustified and egregious. And this is the problem with postmodernism and academic scholarship. Like, that sort of seems to me like the implicit premise that's being made there. But the person who is coming from the social justice side is saying there are good reasons for us to deplatform this person who is saying that trans women are not women. There are good reasons there that they could point to and they could argue for.
They don't address the argument, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're just like, this is a priori contentless. There's no potency to the argument. Therefore, it's just people pitching a fit. That sort of seems to me like the implicit stuff going on there.
Well, I think that like the protesting and the demands are fine, but the actual deplatforming I don't find to be okay. That to me goes too far. I actually think it's even better for the people who are anti social justice, whatever, who don't like these things. Yeah. I think it's better for them if they do actually speak.
Jimmy, I just think that if we got into a debate about this right now, it would turn into another 30-minute segment. And then
it might, but it does tie into that's why they bring up John Stuart Mill's all -1. It's the same type of thing. It's even if the fact that they're wrong is why they should, like, it's part of why it's better to let them speak.
And that's an argument, but like if we were gonna hash it out and someone were to play devil's advocate and go back and forth on this, I just really think that it would take a long time. And we're already like, over an hour in, and I think we will all agree that chapter 10 is much more,
That's true.
like, philosophically interesting.
I am
don't know if
actually
everyone's here for
I am
philosophical
actually
purposes,
pulling
but
on chapter 10 with what I just said. That's
Yeah.
more in chapter 10.
I'm trying to get to chapter 10 personally.
We can just skip
there are a
ahead
few-
if you want
No,
to.
there are a few other things that I think it's worth mentioning in here. So on the same page that we were on, Arco 217, there's a few points where they're just like, they exaggerate a little bit in their representation of actual, like, historical fact, and I don't know whether they are aware that they're doing it. Sometimes I don't know if it's even right to call it exaggeration, but so on page 217, towards the bottom, they're talking about the Hypatia transracialism controversy, where an assistant professor, untenured, of philosophy at, was it Vanderbilt, I believe? Her name is Rebecca Tuvel, and she got a paper published in Hypatia, a feminist philosophy journal, called, I think, In Defense of Transracialism. And they say, when they're discussing it, on page 217 toward the bottom, they say that Tuvel paid the price for this misstep, where she basically said, if we accept transgender people as, really the gender that they identify with, then we should accept transracial people as really the race that they claim to identify with. They say that she paid the price for this misstep. Not only was her paper retracted, and not only did Hypatia suffer catastrophically for accepting it, but so too was she subjected to a vicious witch hunt. Her colleagues publicly blasted her for her insensitivity, even though some privately admitted that they secretly agreed with her. So that is a very one-dimensional reading of what happened to Rebecca Tuvel. The vast majority of not only philosophy PhDs and professional philosophers across the academy, but academics, the entire academic community, the vast majority came out in vocal support of Rebecca Tuvel after she was, I think it would be fair to call what many philosophers and other academics did orchestrate a sort of witch hunt, basically just, harassing the shit out of her on the internet.
Who did that?
For this paper? Who did what?
Who did the harassing?
Other philosophers, sociologists, people in other disciplines, PhD students, and I imagine some junior professors probably as well. There was an open letter signed.
I have a question. It's not. I mean, we can hold it and talk about it later. But
no, just what is it?
For me, like okay, if gender and race are social constructs to some degree or another.
Oh, no, I don't think we should discuss this. Now you're gonna say, like, is it the paper correct? I think that is not relevant enough for us to talk about. Like, I was just trying to point out that, as a matter of fact, her paper was not retracted. They say it was retracted. And they give, like, in the end note, you can go literally click on the link, and if you read down, it's like, want to clarify, the paper was not retracted. And they say, not only did Hypatia suffer catastrophically for accepting it, but so too was she subjected to a vicious witch hunt. Her colleagues publicly, like, they don't mention at all that the vast majority of the academic community came out in support of her. Her job was not threatened at all. In fact, I think her career might have been helped overall from this.
Probably.
And not to say that it was justified what happened to her, but, like, if you look at the overall pros and cons of her experience, right? She published a controversial paper, and another journal posted an issue, which is, this is what should happen, right? A paper gets peer reviewed and accepted. It should not be retracted. If people want to critique the paper, then they should write their own paper. And in fact, there was a sort of what do you call it? Like a special review on her paper specifically, with like 3 or 4 scholars writing their own papers critiquing, and then her at the end writing another paper responding to criticisms. So I mean, overall, I think her career was helped. And then on page 218, is it 218? No. We go on. They talk more about some STEM stuff. And where's cancel culture? This is on page 222. So at the top, they're talking about cancel culture. They say that people are trying to punish people who are influential in media and the arts. They're calling for the punishment of celebrities, artists, athletes, and other prominent individuals who have spoken against social justice. This is cancel culture. This chilling practice often involves the utter destruction of someone's career and reputation for something she might have said decades ago or as a teenager. They talk about Kevin Hart. They say the Black actor Kevin Hart was forced to step down as host of the Oscars, for example, when old tweets containing gay slurs were discovered. That's not true. The Oscars called him because somebody went and like dug these up when it was announced that he would be the host of the Oscars, and then they went viral. And so the Oscars called him, the Academy called him, and they were like, hey, we really need you to just issue a public apology. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. Like, I'm not apologizing for that. That's his decision. And so he stepped down from doing the Oscars. But they say here that he was forced to step down. I mean, no, he was not forced to step down. He was given the option to apologize publicly. No, he was not forced to step down. If you're forced to step down, it's like they're saying, look, we don't want to fire you, but like you better step down.
Having to apologize for something you've apologized for many times just seems a little absurd to me.
Okay, but you're not being forced to step down if you don't apologize. That's not.
Well, I feel like
Buterin was
Kevin
not forced to confess for crimes against the Soviet Union.
I feel like with Kevin Hart's case, it's not like the apologies that he made in one context don't just like, it's not like he can call dibs and it's like, I made this one apology and now it's always out there. Some people haven't heard the apology.
Well, I know, but his point was, I have apologized over and over and over again, and it never seems to be enough. So I'm not like, what do you want from, like, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? Do I just have to forever apologize? It's just, where do we get to forgiveness? Where do we get to, like, why aren't the people who are reporting on this also reporting on why on the apologies?
This is not relevant to the question of whether
I'm just responding to what was said. If
and then they say that when he was later injured in a car accident, many social justice oriented activists celebrated it. No citations there. I imagine they saw a couple on Twitter. Then some discussion of Ellen DeGeneres being canceled, Mario Lopez, some other people, Serena Williams. And then they say at the end of the paragraph, the examples are nearly endless. And then the next paragraph, all of this comes from activists who have adopted theory.
Yeah, that's where they lose me too.
I still don't know what they mean by theory, and it's really annoying me. Like, Jesus Christ.
Maybe they're trying to say theory and they have a list.
Yeah, they explain what theory is. It's postmodern theory. It's the 2 truths and the 4 principles. It's in the first chapter. They explain. It's nonsense, but they explain what they mean by that.
And it evolves. It evolves over time to have there's the original postmodernism, applied postmodernism, and then reified postmodernism. And these are all different iterations
are they just saying
theory, capital T.
Are they just saying that the theory is a current set of cultural norms that has a historical tie to these philosophies from this other time period?
I don't think it's current. I think it's the theory created by theorists, like these theorists specifically.
Right, but there's a whole
Well,
bunch
that's their
of them
claim, but
in different eras. That is
I don't-
Kimberly
so-
Crenshaw, like Kimberly Crenshaw's. I actually did a talk with Jim back like last year about specifically. I wanted to know what does he mean by theory, and like what's all this that's going on with the Grievance Studies stuff. And I remember him saying Kimberly Crenshaw was kind of where they're starting for the current stuff.
It's interesting because the book says other things, but
But Helen wrote the book more than Jim, so that's why I
True,
did that.
true.
Yeah, so it could be not perfectly on exactly.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Sorry I hijacked that, guys. If anyone has other answers.
No, that's it actually makes a lot of sense that it does seem like there's not a clear agreement on the people writing this book on what they're talking about.
Yeah, for real.
Well, I
For real.
spoke with him last year though, so that might be, or maybe coming up on almost 2 years ago. So it could be that they've changed what the theory. He was so intense about theory. Like that was the thing. He's like, it's theory. It comes down to theory. The theory of the theorists that I think
Yeah.
he was talking about.
But that word is not like by itself. That word doesn't mean anything. Like this entire book, they start very early on, and often to make sure that they emphasize, this is postmodernism, often referred to simply as theory with a capital T, and they'll literally use brackets to insert the capital T into someone else's quotes. Like it's there's no one talking about theory capital T that they are, and it's their special.
I also that's sort of what's really confusing to me here, because I see they're using theory. I see that they think theory is based in this postmodernism, but I don't think that I have the same meaning for postmodernism that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say, okay, well, what is this theory, and someone says postmodernism, I know they're not representing postmodernism accurately. So I don't know what that means. Whenever when they're saying it's postmodernism, I still don't know what that means. It's like really unclear to me what it seems to me like the word theory here is doing a bunch of heavy lifting, and this vagueness that they have around it, I think, is something that they're kind of relying on for a lot of their argument.
It's the same problem in that fucking music theory video.
Yes.
I have nothing else on this chapter. Does anyone else want to talk about that chapter?
On page 225, they bring up James Damore. I really think there was a lot to be said there, but we don't have to keep going on that.
So I think what's happening is that this is the chapter where they talk about how much social justice is a problem, and I feel like there are better places to look for answers to that question.
Agree.
And that's the only role of this chapter. And actually, I think it's a legitimate chapter to have here. I mean, if you're talking about a problem, this is the place to explain the breadth of the problem. And I don't think it's as much a problem as they portray it. But again, this chapter isn't the best place to have this discussion. I feel like they do the examples they put up, that's the problem. If you're someone who thinks that this is a problem, they've presented the problem. So again, I think this chapter is kind of okay.
I guess I just don't understand how social justice is something that is unique to our time period. It seems to me like in every time period where society existed, there are social norms, and there are things that are outside of these social norms. And then if you don't adhere to the social norms, you're acting unjustly. And those things can be enforced with virtue signaling or something like that. So it just seems to me like what's happened is we're in a time where those norms are changing, and it changing is what's bad. Not that society is guiding it in some way with deplatforming or something like that. Those things seem to me to be instruments that have been used in all different times of human history, but targeted certain people for certain reasons. And they just don't like the targeting that's happening in our current zeitgeist.
Right. And they have argued earlier in the book for why they think these things are misguided in this specific most recent manifestation of social justice with the capital S and the capital J that derives from postmodernism and specifically pernicious in a way that the previous social justices back in the days of John Rawls, the great old John Rawls, he cared about good social justice, and now it's bad social justice. And they, I mean, they do argue this.
It's funny they mention that because John Rawls did not go into race very deeply. That's one of the criticisms of John Rawls' political theory, is he doesn't address something that is really important to the American political landscape, which is race.
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Don't talk about race.
Well, it's like the history of race, right? It's not actually. I don't know if we should be getting into John Rawls.
No, you're right though, Chris. Like
another time. Yeah. We should definitely chat.
All right, chapter 10.
I do feel like chapter 10 is an attempt to answer what Arco just said, though. That why this social justice is different.
They claim to have the answers.
I'm in agreement with them on this one.
Oh man, I can't wait to McGriddle you, Jimmy. Let's do it. Okay.
Look, okay. Before we start, do you agree that the Greeks knew about liberalism? Like, let's just set a baseline.
Well, they define it in a certain way. Yeah, they talk about liberalism in Greece. But before they say that stuff, they would say like, look, liberalism was not invented or discovered by anyone. No, liberalism is like this impulse. Like whenever you want to solve problems socially and make things better for people, that's
liberalism.
Yeah.
Which is like such a bullshit definition. Like
I kind of died inside listening to that.
Yeah, it's horrible. But Jimmy's gonna come to its defense.
I don't agree with that part, and I said so in our earlier chat. I don't agree that liberalism is. I do think that the liberty and oppression moral framework is a real thing. But liberalism as a sort of framework in itself is not. It's not the same thing. And I think they would have been better had they said that liberalism answers these questions better. Liberalism is a better way of dealing with this.
They do have to describe liberalism eventually, and so we'll get into what exactly they mean by it and all the different ways that they characterize it. So the chapter starts. Can I
have a short side comment on that version? If anyone finds that like idea of an impulse towards the good kind of interesting, there's a book by Philip Kitcher called The Ethical Project that makes a pretty good case for something like that, just like you would never call it liberalism. It's a constant force for like trying to find better ways to manage society, basically.
I can actually get behind that, but like the way that they have, I agree. The way they framed this is pretty similar to Sam Harris's well-being thing. Like, on
Yanai's point, Philip Kitcher, also David Wong's book, Natural Moralities, also makes a plausible case for sort of basic evolutionarily adapted strategy of having morality to promote social cooperation, which helped us survive a long time ago, and so we still have morality today. I take it Kitcher's argument is somewhat similar to that, Yanai?
Less biological, more. He wants to protect the idea of moral progress, that we progress morally throughout time.
Okay, gotcha. So the chapter is called An Alternative to the Ideology of Social Justice. Subtitle: Liberalism Without Identity Politics. Sounds great. So the first paragraph is just them sort of contrasting liberalism and theory. Liberalism thinks there's objective truth and knowledge and reality. Theory thinks that we're all just trapped in our own cultures, and you have your thoughts, you have your truth, and I have mine.
I take issue with liberalism thinks that there's objective truth. I don't see that. I mean, I think if anything, liberalism is set up to handle the fact that there isn't.
See, this is an interesting point, and I'm glad you bring this up, Jimmy, as our resident postmodernist.
I'm not a postmodernist. I'm a pre-modernist.
All right.
Are we going Amprim hours?
You're Protagoras. So this often happens is that this liberalism, not only is it their like favored political theory, it becomes a stand-in for basically everything that they claim is good, and it becomes also just the foil basically of postmodern theory.
It's their
and
god.
So liberalism is not only a political theory, it actually has an epistemology, it has a philosophy of science, it has a consistent ethic. Like they frequently say like liberal ethics as if this is a thing. Like whose liberal ethics? John Stuart Mill, Immanuel Kant, Adam Smith. Like which liberal ethicist? Could it be a liberal error theory? It could be any of these things. But no, James Lindsay has said that metaethics is a waste of time. So, and we'll see exactly why he thinks that.
Because he has his God. He doesn't need it.
Right. It's so obvious. So, yeah. Okay. They're introducing it, and one of the things that they say that stuck out to me was that they say liberalism is inherently constructive because of the evolutionary processes it engenders. So they talk a couple times about how liberalism engenders evolutionary processes. And I take it the idea is that, which they touch on a lot, is that liberalism is sort of self-correcting. And so liberalism, once it's like in motion, it's like ready to evolve and continue to get better slowly over time, magically, like, Steven Pinker's wet dream.
I don't think it's magically.
I think a big mistake that is made about the theory is thinking of the theory as a worldview that tries to explain things about our existence, explain things about social norms, explain things about ethics, and then provide prescriptions from those explanations. But my understanding of something like postmodernism is it's a method, it's a methodology of being skeptical to those presuppositions that liberalism has. So of course, if they're going to affirm liberalism as the truth, something that would be skeptical of what they take as the truth would be something totally antagonistic that they would want to debunk.
That's the confusion with the word theory, because I think when in this case they're talking about critical theory, they're not talking about postmodernism. They've just called it reified postmodernism. But I don't think postmodernists themselves would accept that label. I don't think that.
Well, their claim is that postmodernism isn't dead; it evolved.
Yeah.
So there's
that's
a sense in
just
which
nonsense to me.
It is. It is. And yeah, Arco, I think you're right. It seems to be going on throughout the book.
I don't think it would have been better to say postmodernism. Like, this is where we get into the weeds, but postmodernism created a void of meaning, and critical theory filled the void.
Yes, I think that would have been more plausible than the account that they give in this book.
No argument from me. I don't think you can attribute postmodernism for anything applied.
I mean, except it's like chronologically impossible, right? Because critical theory predates postmodernism.
Critical
theory didn't become a real threat or a popular thing until after postmodernism.
No, that's not
true.
Well,
like postmodernism, like postmodernism, critical theory is a method. So it's like the method had a resurgence. Of course, it predates postmodernism, but philosophers took up the method again and applied it to race and gender.
Took up what method?
Um,
Critical theory?
I think
Yeah.
since the
Yeah.
end of the Second World War, there has never been a time where critical theory was not in vogue
Yeah.
somewhere. Like
Yeah.
it's never. It's a continuity. There's no like
In vogue
retaking
in
of the method.
in philosophy, sure. Like
No, not only in philosophy.
Well, they're talking about from the 80s on, I think. I think that's what they mean when they're talking about the way it's being currently applied.
Yes.
They
This is
make
just
that
this is
protest
just
and whatnot.
a critique of the idea that postmodernism created a hole that critical theory had to fill because just that couldn't happen.
not that it
Oh,
had
you're
to
saying- oh,
not that it had to fill, but I mean in situations where people have crises of meaning, they do find something to fill that hole. They could choose Christianity and become fundamentalists in that way, or not. I don't know, but I just don't think people can operate with just the question. They have to answer it.
Okay, Jordan, your time is up. All right. Yes. Now, they say that liberalism, there's like the virtue of liberalism is its sort of fatal flaw, or its main weakness is that it's so tolerant of differences of opinion, right? Making freedom of speech and freedom of belief possible, but also making it possible for people to publicly raise criticisms of liberalism, as they claim. Sort of, they say over and over again that postmodernism. They say this throughout the book, that postmodernism has like always been anti-liberalism, and I don't remember them ever really substantiating that, aside from the part where when they talk about critical race theory, one of the tenets of critical race theory is that critical race theory is sort of skeptical of the ontology of liberalism, according to which there's just like these sort of atomic, isolated individuals who are like raceless and perfectly free. And so that's a critique of the ontology of liberalism as it has been for a long time in the mainstream philosophical view. When critical race theory is coming onto the scene, that is not an objection to liberalism proper. So again, I don't think that they've ever shown that postmodernism in any of its manifestations is anti-liberalism. Then, so yeah, this is like the fatal weakness. It opens it up for a problem. So they say then towards the bottom of 238 that capitalism is the purely liberal economic system. And then we realized after we implemented capitalism that utterly unregulated capitalism is a catastrophe. This was what Karl Marx was reacting against. So I don't think Karl Marx was reacting against utterly unregulated capitalism. I think that's sort of historically inaccurate. And I don't even know a lot about Marx, but
Was it somewhat unregulated though?
it's
Well,
unregulated compared to
What
now.
do they mean by regulation? What do they mean by regulation here?
Well, we don't fucking know.
No,
The
the thing is,
idea-
whatever
the
they mean, like regulated or unregulated, I think Karl Marx would have objected pretty much
Right.
in the
He
same
objected-
way.
He
'Cause-
objected to regulated capitalism too.
It
Like,
would have been
Yeah.
more correct to say that Marxism took hold because of unregulated capitalism.
I don't think that's true.
Marxism is the continuation of liberal values and ideas. He's
What?
taking these ideas
I don't
I
agree
would
with
not
that.
agree.
liberal
I would
philosophers.
actually,
Going
Oh,
from my
Jesus
readings of
fucking
Marxism,
Christ.
I would not agree.
No, Marx is the continuation of Enlightenment thinking.
Mm,
That's not the same as liberalism, though.
the value of
Yeah,
freedom,
But he's using the
the
ideas
value
of liberalism,
freedom, the value of like
alienation, all of these things.
human dignity, right? Human nature and our ability to self-actualize. I think it's more of an Aristotelian.
He uses a
idea than it
Rousseauian
is-
idea. He uses a Rousseauian idea of human nature.
Well, he.
I mean, it's
he
not a
claimed that
it's
he
not a
wasn't
stretch to
influenced by
say.
Rousseau.
Do you think there would have been Marxist revolutions had things not been so bad for the poor and so good for the rich?
No,
no,
I
Probably.
didn't say that.
There weren't even
I don't
Marxist
think
revolutions in the most highly industrialized nation at the time. Like the First World War kicked off and nothing happened.
Yeah. Okay. This is
Like-
really not
Sorry, I
not
asked the
super
question.
no. The
important.
point.
It's
The
okay.
point. The point that I'm trying to. The point that I'm trying to show here is that they're misrepresenting Marx's view as it relates to capitalism, because Marx was taking these ideas from the philosophers before him and applying it to economic structures and using a scientific theory to talk about the long-term process of capitalism, which he said would eat himself.
That's why I'm saying it would have been more correct to have talked about the popularity of Marxism rather than Marx himself. Why Marxism became a thing. Why are we talking about it? Why is it something that took off?
I feel like Marx is here to like piss off some people. I don't think that this
Yeah, they don't
claim
know what
should
they're-
even be addressed seriously.
So then they say, yeah, so we found out we needed to regulate capitalism. How crazy is that, right? The most purely liberal economic system actually has to get regulated because of the power of monopolies and the influence of dishonest actors. They say, the ancient Greeks also recognized the tyranny inherent in the liberal political order, democracy. When it is
That's
not
like my
properly
favorite
managed.
line in all the book.
Crazy. So they're both asserting that the liberal political order is democracy. And so I mean, I guess they're not technically attributing to the Greeks a conception of liberalism. They're just saying like the Greeks saw in democracy the potential for tyranny, and democracy is the liberal political order.
Which is still like bullshit, because what we call democracy is closer to what the Greeks called like republic or aristocracy, right? So like,
yeah,
well,
it's more like
yeah.
republic than democracy.
So then they say, then they start talking about the liberal approach to knowledge production. So here we get into liberal epistemology. They say, by contrast, postmodern theory views the failures of the liberal order and its knowledge-producing systems in a cynical way, as means by which the powerful obscure the limiting potential of oppression. That sounds very Marxist and not very postmodern. And focuses on how unfair they can be, particularly to those who start out disadvantaged. It would thus tear the systems down. It's funny because we were told in the beginning of the book that postmodernism was essentially apolitical. So, okay. Then they say a further difficulty. Oh, here we go. A further difficulty with liberalism is that it is difficult to define. Liberalism is perhaps best understood as a desire to gradually make society fairer, freer, and less cruel, one practical goal after another. This is liberalism.
Which would just be, that would be Marxism. That's the goal of Marxism.
Liberalism, on that definition, I think is technically compatible with Marxism. They say this because liberalism is a system of conflict resolution, not a solution to human conflicts. So this is, now they're saying, okay, this is not exactly.
That's just dialectic. That's the dialectic. That's dialectical materialism, conflict and resolution. They're Marxists. What are they talking about?
Well, they say it's not a solution to human conflicts, which I think the revolution, right, would be the solution to like all existing conflict in society. They're saying, no, this is a system of conflict resolution, which I think they want us to infer means internal to the society, and not sort of, not in any like predictable way, not because of like hierarchical social relations or anything like that. They say this later, but no, I agree. Like, at this point, when I was here, I was like, I don't know what the fuck these people are actually saying.
That was to me one of the most coherent things in the chapter. I think that's absolutely correct.
That is dialectical materialism. The conditions of what's going on in society, there's conflict and resolution. I don't understand why they're sort of saying that, like they're like putting down Marxism earlier, but yet they're using this idea, which we can trace back to Hegel, which Marx and Feuerbach put into their theories.
No, I mean, I don't know enough to really respond to the Marxist thing, but I think what they're saying is liberalism would never attempt to resolve all conflicts. Liberalism would set up a framework from which people could resolve conflicts.
I thought it had to do with being tolerant of one's brother.
Yeah. It has more to do with saying, okay, if we all value this system, then there will be a way to mediate conflict. But we're not going to attempt to prevent conflict. Conflict is part of life, and it's actually part of progress. So the question is, how do you deal with conflict?
Okay, so what strikes me as very strange is about this first definition here. They say liberalism is a desire to gradually make society fairer, freer, and less cruel, one practical goal after another. So, like, unless I know what you mean by fair, free, and cruel, I have no idea what liberalism is really supposed to be here, because these are very morally significant concepts, and there could be a society we would not recognize as liberal insofar as it does not make individual freedom the centerpiece of the political model, but the people in that society might see it as perfectly free, perfectly fair, and not at all cruel. So this doesn't seem to be the sort of way that we use liberalism, as far as I can tell.
No, it doesn't. I don't think it's a good representation of liberalism.
I mean, it's kind of.
I also don't think it's a.
It's
Sorry,
just the Sam Harris approach to philosophy. It's like you take the first thing you hear at a freshman course, and you're like, "This sounds really good to me. I bet nobody has thought of any problems with this. Let's present it as something that can just solve all the problems."
But just you wait, and we're not even close.
I don't think they're trying to solve all the problems.
They're not. They're definitely not. But they're using liberalism here as a kind of this is the obvious solution. Not solution in the sense that then society stops, but this. It's so obvious that this is how we should organize society, that we should understand everything that isn't this as a kind of nefarious anti-force. And this is just a very uncritical look at liberalism. And if you want to make that claim, that's a really strong claim that deserves its own book about liberalism.
And I mean, in a sense, they are sort of trying to solve all the problems. They're not trying to solve all the problems of society, but they've given us a massive catalog of problems from their view up until this point in the book. And this is supposed to be the solution.
No, it's not the solution. It's the path. I mean, it's like, this is what I said. Somebody said, how is it not the same thing?
The solution is you start building the path, and then you follow the path long enough, and the problem is solved.
No, the problems will never be solved. I'm not going.
No, these problems will be solved.
I am not going to try to ensure that you never have a dispute with your neighbor. Instead, we're going to try to set up an increasingly better system for how we handle those disputes, acknowledging that those disputes are forever going to happen. And actually, the disputes themselves are part of what helps us make it better at handling those disputes. We're not trying to prevent bad things from happening. We're trying to.
No. I'm talking about what they're giving us in this book is not just a collection of people having isolated problems. They're identifying trends in their view, right? They've isolated the causes, and now they're going to tell us how we can address these particular problems that are new in society. We're never going to get rid of like disputes with your neighbor, but this specific like civilization threatening problem, this is their solution, is to return to the basic principles of liberalism and to somehow connect these to science and ethics and just go into the marketplace of ideas and let the market do its work.
I don't think that's what they're saying. I think what they're saying is you guys have all these ideas for how to change society. Okay, use the liberal method to get that to happen. Say it. Go out and say it.
I think they do. I think they are saying that with the first part of this chapter where they talk about like liberalism accepts correspondence theory of truth, and the theory is just Wittgensteinian language games, that there is no truth. It's just words that don't concretely connect to things being true or false. And everyone is just left with their own beliefs, and things are true in virtue of them believing it. But I think that's a total misrepresentation of the epistemology of some postmodernists, or even a misrepresentation of what Wittgenstein was talking about, or what other theories of truth would talk about, like a coherentist or something.
Jimmy, what were you trying to say in your previous point? You were saying you guys want to solve these problems, use liberalism. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
That they're saying?
That's what I think. That's how I read it. Yeah, use liberalism. Go talk about this stuff. Affect change. But you can't do it by trying to... I think most of this is a response to what they see as shutting people down. As you know, like...
No, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, like, yes, they're saying, look, use the tools of liberalism to which we're all at least, you know, implicitly committed by living in like a liberal society. But they also they give us a very specific characterization of liberalism. So that's what I'm saying. Is like,
I don't think that's
they
the problem.
say use liberalism, this liberalism.
I think the problem is just that they ignore like what the obvious rebuttals would be. Like they should read all of these critical race theory books because they'll explain why liberalism as a framework doesn't help them. So for example, they might argue, well, one problem with liberalism is that it gives you rules of play, but when the game is already stacked against you, those fair rules don't help you kind of achieve actual justice. So this is just a problem with liberalism. Now you can try to explain how liberalism can kind of resolve that problem, but you actually have to do the work. What they do here is just say, like,
and in critical race theory, there are some.
It's unjust. Like I think they think we're at the level playing field already. They seem to be saying that sort of thing in the lead up to these chapters.
Who's that even playing field?
All people in society,
American society,
like everyone.
Races in the U.S.
And also,
I don't
like,
think they're saying that.
Critical race theory. There are some critical race philosophers who are liberals, who think that the ideal society would be a liberal society. Like Kwame Appiah is one such philosopher. He wants us to get to a true liberal society. He's reclaiming liberalism so that it would be more inclusive. And he's pointing out that there's this problem we have right now that critical race theory can address. And that can get us to the liberal society we want. So I think that they are sort of strawmanning critical race theory a bit whenever they're talking about how critical race theory denies liberalism. Those things can be coherent.
So when they talk about liberalism, right, I mean, they make it clear they think that liberalism is sort of self-correcting in a way, and they actually think that science and regulated capitalism are also, this is like this perfect holy trinity of self-regulating, self-correcting sort of structuring principles of society. And these are not meta-narratives because they question themselves.
That's where obviously I disagreed. I think everybody has, and like I wrote down in there, this is your meta narrative. You
do they think that they're like primitives or something?
They think that they're not meta narratives because they self-question and self-regulate, that they're sort of they adapt to their environment.
So what? It's still a meta narrative. It's a meta narrative about adapting to your environment. It's still.
I get it. I'm just trying to explain to Arco.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I agree with that contention. I wrote the same thing. Like, this is a meta-narrative. It doesn't make it worse that it's a meta-narrative. It's actually a great thing that it's a meta-narrative to me. I have a hard time understanding what liberalism is doing that's in the way.
Do they offer an explanation about what it is if it's not a meta-narrative? Like, is there some label they give it? Or is it just sort of like, it's not a meta-narrative, like, we're going to leave it at that?
It's not a meta-narrative because it is self-critical and self-correcting, basically. That's what they say. And when they talk about that, they say, yeah, I mean, so they say it's always a work in progress. This on page 239. As it solves each problem, it moves on to new problems, continually finding new conflicts to resolve and new goals to achieve. In this way, liberalism involves an evolutionary process. Such processes invariably make mistakes and sometimes even go completely awry before being subjected to the necessary criticisms and correction. So I was wondering, like, what would it look like for liberalism to go completely awry and then be subjected to the necessary criticisms and correction, right? And the sort of thing, I mean, I'm thinking like fascism, right? Like fascism, and then a world war.
I'll be honest.
Genocide.
I find any amount of anti-liberalism to be anti-American, and I don't tolerate it. Like, I don't have any tolerance for it. So when I hear that there's problems with liberalism, I think that's just nonsense. It's lazy.
So
it's
this
un-American.
is the point I'm trying to make. Is like, so how is it that they're going to basically, on the one hand, rely so much on distinguishing liberalism from illiberalism, and all of these, they give a list of like all these different kinds of illiberalism that include, geez, where are they? There's so many of them. I can't find them all right now, but the illiberalism is like totalitarianism, colonialism, a patriarchy, right? All these are illiberal political structures, but yet they're admitting that, well, liberalism's never perfect. It might go completely awry before being subjected to the necessary criticism. So either liberalism cannot do the work that they want it to do because it is always prone to go off the rails in a certain way, or when it goes off the rails, it's not really liberalism, in which case it doesn't make sense to call it self-correcting.
Wait, I'm confused by your first point. I mean, it's allowing itself to go off the rails is part of why it's very good. It allows itself to find out where it's wrong.
Well, I mean,
how does liberalism allow itself to find?
I mean,
this is one of my problems with the whole fucking virus type narratives. They talk about these things as if they're living, breathing organisms.
I guess I don't. I guess like yeah. I mean, if liberalism is self-correcting, then there would be some mechanism in liberalism that would prevent it from going off the rails.
No. That's not it at all. It goes off the rails, which helps it not go off the rails in the same way again next time. Error correcting does not mean never error.
So what's the mechanism? What's the?
If it's not on the rails, how is it still liberalism?
Wait, what? I don't know how to answer. I mean, error correcting does not mean never error. It means correct after an error.
That's not what I'm saying.
No,
that's not what I'm saying.
But they didn't say just error correcting. They said they're going completely awry.
Completely off.
Yeah.
Right. Totally out of, now it's no longer, it just seems to me like they're saying,
like, oops, we elected a
liberalism
fascist.
would leave liberalism. Yeah. Hitler's in charge now.
I mean, America is a liberal.
What did we do wrong?
America has always been a liberal democracy. It also had slavery. It went completely off the rails with its slavery.
Well, this is part of my critique is like that, people want to make the argument, real communism has never been tried. According to their definitions, real liberalism has never been tried.
I don't agree with that. I think it's
right. It seems to me like liberalism has not been fulfilled yet, and that we're marching towards it.
No, liberalism is what we're doing. Like the fact that yes, that's it's not an end state. It's
all
not.
Men are created equal has not existed for the majority of the United States history.
This depends on your definition of doing.
Wait a
This
minute.
will be a semantic
Andrea was saying
game.
something.
Who was?
Andrea?
Oh, sorry. Jimmy, was it you who said something about it's not an end point? Like, is it a process then, or is it can we ever arrive at a liberal state?
I don't think that's a liberal value. Liberalism is a process. It's a way of existing. It's a process. It's a thing you do. It's not. You don't reach liberal utopia. You just attempt to live by liberal values, which means fucking up and learning from your mistakes, and fucking up and learning from your mistakes, and hopefully you don't make the same mistake again. Hopefully your error correcting mechanism worked and you don't make that error again.
I just have a different view about what liberalism is than I think there's a process to it, but one of the things that I think is really important to liberalism is that all men in that system would have equal moral value, and the state would be guaranteeing that.
I don't agree with that.
That to me seems to me to be a central tenet of liberalism.
I don't agree with that. I think in if there was a liberal ideal, it would be anarchist. Like it would be there wouldn't need to be a state because you'd be in a liberal utopia, and you wouldn't need the government, the state to do that.
In liberal philosophy, the state is justified because you need the state there to regulate these rights.
Okay.
To guarantee that someone else cannot impose their preferences on you against your will.
Okay.
That's where the all minus one thing, that principle that Mill is putting out there.
Has this gotten us, are we closer to it or further away from it?
One of the justifications. I think we've gotten closer to it than in history. But my point here is that there are these tenets of liberalism that I think are really crucial. One of which is this idea that all men are created equal. There's moral value for all men that is equal. Mm-hmm. And the state guarantees that. And that's the justification for the state existing.
Yeah, no,
so
okay, I can get
liberalism has a state in part. So it can be a really small state. Like it can be a Nozikian state where it's like very, very libertarian, but just enough to guarantee those rights. That would be like a liberal state. If it's not a liberal state, then it's an anarchy, which I think other systems would better explain. I don't think liberalism and anarchy are coherent.
Interesting. I don't think of it that way. I think that like you can be liberal in your neighborhood without any state present. And by that, I mean, like, if you see something happening and you know that whatever's happening is not creating equality between men and between all the people in your neighborhood, you're following a liberal ideal.
We might mean equality different here. I'm talking about like moral equality, equality of rights, equality of opportunity, not outcome.
Okay. So by rights, you mean the thing that the state provides.
Okay, wait, can I, let me say something?
Yeah, like right to life, right to liberty, right?
Well, like, the thing about equality of outcome, like, I think it literally makes no sense to talk about equality of outcome. Like,
I agree.
Because, you know, like, it's not just, I guess it's, what I'm trying to say, it's kind of like a logical fallacy even to talk about like equality of outcome, because even if you think, if what you're trying to say is, well, equality of outcome means like economic equality or like everyone has the same, like what does that mean, right? Does that mean like, for example, like to talk about very like specific forms of like egalitarian theory, is it equality of welfare or is it like equality of resources, right? Because if it's one, you can't have the other. So no matter what you're talking about, there's always going to be an like you can have equality of outcome in like every aspect ever. Like there's always going to be equality by some measure and inequality by some other measure.
Right.
Whether that's
I think a fulfilled liberal society would have certain things that would be equal and other things that would be different.
but
And
what I mean
the
is like
differences would be celebrated and the equality would be guaranteed.
Well, let me ask a
no, but
question.
what I mean is like every society would have that same thing. Like some things would be equal and some, like a communist society, like a fascist society, like every kind of society would have some things that would be equal and some that wouldn't be. In, you know, like that's my point. Like that's not like particular to liberalism or like any other system, I guess.
Yeah, we don't disagree.
All right, yeah.
So I'm trying to think how I want to ask this question. There's two thoughts in my head that are not. If you, so you think that there is a state from which like we have made it equal for everybody.
Well, I think that there are certain things that would be equal, that need to be equal in a liberal society.
Do you think that the threshold for what is needed to be considered equal has changed?
Yes, it's definitely, there's been huge progress.
No, I
the
mean
United
like
States, for sure.
The line from which you would say that somebody's equal, do you think that has changed? Because I think that's...
I'm not sure.
I think that has changed and will always change. Always change. So like when we reach whatever it is we see now as equality, whatever that ends up being, it will just open the door to seeing something else that needs some sort of repair.
I think there are different realms where equality is important, and there are different roles of government, and it depends on your view. I don't think a liberal society is supposed to guarantee equality in an economic sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think a liberal society is supposed to guarantee equality in a moral sense.
Okay, that's fair. I guess I don't believe this, but I'm automatically going into the opposite. Could you make the argument that lack of economic equality puts you in a moral disadvantage?
In some context, yeah. I don't think it's necessarily the case that it would be a moral issue that there's financial differences.
I don't either. I'm trying really hard to describe why. I don't see how an idea of an end state is progressive. To me, the idea
so
of
when I say liberalism would be fulfilled, I'm not saying that a liberal society would no longer make progress. There would be progress in other realms.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that society could have greater economic gain, or they could have greater welfare programs or something like that. But I guess I just sort of take the tenets of liberalism to be about kind of these guarantees of rights to citizens equally.
This is what we were talking about in the chat earlier. So for me, liberalism is an attempt to extend liberty to more people, and you can see that as rights, whatever would extend liberty. And there's massive disagreement as to what would do that. So like the example I gave is some people might say free healthcare would make it more equal because then the people who don't have any money wouldn't have to be worried about that, and it would free them up in a serious way. And then other people might say, well, that's actually harming my freedom because I don't want to pay for some of this healthcare. I don't agree with it. So I see it as a sort of a constant sort of, I don't want to use the word battle because it doesn't have to be violent, but a tugging back and forth between different ways of extending liberty that just never is going to end. And I worry because when I hear about people talking about like the final thing or fulfilling it, I just think that's too utopian for me. I don't see that. If you think that that's possible, then anything but that is violent or oppressive or like worthy of.
I don't think so, Jimmy.
No?
Because people no, because people might, right? So when someone who's coming from a perspective like Arcos, they're not saying that anything short of the end state is like, you know, is, well, no, how do I want to put this? So I mean, the way that I think you're conceiving of it is like there has to be a way for us to sorry, the way that you're conceiving of it is like, look, we're all still going to have some things we disagree about in the end, and so we'll never reach this sort of like perfect liberal democratic end state. Is that correct? Like,
I'm
there's going to
actually
be trade-offs and conflicts.
I would go further and say that that is preferable.
Okay, either way, right? Arco is not saying that the end state will be something like where there are no more conflicts. Arco is saying that, look, there's a threshold where people's rights have to be respected. These rights for everyone need to be respected. Once we get there, we've achieved a liberal society. Now, there's a whole bunch of questions going forward about what sort of policies we want in our society. People are going to vote on different things, and that's like the democratic process. But the place
There's
we
even
need to
disagreement
get to first,
over whether their rights are not, they don't have equal rights. I mean, there's disagreement on that. It's not like
No.
a non-trivial point.
I think one of the things that
It is a
they're trying to do
non-trivial
in this book is to say that those who ascribe to the theory are going to sort of be like, oh, hey, those rights you're talking about are a spook, and play Wittgensteinian word games or something like that. And when you do that, there are terrible consequences for your society or something. At least that's sort of what I was getting out of the first chapter, or the first couple paragraphs of this book, or of this chapter in this book.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm straddling this position where I don't feel I can defend this book, but I do feel like there are things in it that you guys are responding to that I don't think you're understanding what they're saying. That's my opinion. But even them, I don't think they do a good job of
what do you think I'm
Yeah, I don't.
not responding to?
I think the thing is that it's a very naive view of liberalism, and I think Arco is just giving you like some of the complications that arise with liberalism, and it's hard to.
I still don't
discuss
get
this in
what are
context
the
of this
issues
book.
that arise with liberalism.
There are like so many.
like you already gave some, right? With the healthcare example.
I don't see that
That's
as an
a
issue.
trade-off.
I see that as opening
Can I just
the
complete
door.
the
Yeah, sorry.
So the problem is that this discussion is very freeform because liberalism is a lot of things to a lot of people, and criticisms vary, and they can come like from within liberalism, they can come from without as an alternative. And this book doesn't tackle any of that. It just says like, isn't liberalism like cool and the ultimate method? So if we want and if we think it's worth our time, we can engage in a kind of conversation with what I and Alco and Sam kind of remember are complications and critiques of liberalism. But it's important to know that like this book doesn't engage in a conversation about liberalism. It just says liberalism, good solution to everything. Not solution. Like this is the path, and goes forward.
That's fair. That's why I wish they would have been honest about that. Like, this is their meta narrative. They believe that this is the way that these problems can be best solved. I agree with them on that. I don't understand what like problems liberalism has. I mean, I understand that liberalism isn't perfect. That's not the claim. I just don't understand what problems can liberalism not address.
Well,
So
sorry.
no, Yanai has already raised one. For instance, right? All the rules can be the same and thus fair for all the same people, and you can claim that there's equality of opportunity. But if there's already a massive if there's already massive disparity in wealth, then it's not actually fair. The rules don't actually apply in the same way for everyone. That's just one example.
Well, that was something I said, but I thought we were talking about morality.
That's a moral
what?
problem with liberalism. Like you can think,
Oh.
well, if the rules are fair, if we play by them fairly, we get a morally good result. And the problem is that if the starting condition isn't fair, it's I mean, the rules being fair isn't enough, right? That's the analogy of like playing Monopoly, but someone starts with all the money. And then you can say, okay, so we just have to reach a fair state and then start with fair rules.
Yeah, but
Well,
liberalism has and continues to address that.
in what way?
I mean, in the popularity of Bernie Sanders, for example. I mean, there's nothing.
Wait, how does Bernie Sanders' popularity address anything?
There's nothing in liberalism preventing anybody from making that case and pushing things in that direction. Liberalism is open to that.
Here are a couple of things preventing them. So first of all, when people have access to more wealth, they have more access to the political class. They can affect the legislation. We all know how that works. People who are disenfranchised, it's very hard for them to kind of reach positions of power. You know, there are big corporations paying a lot of money for propaganda against them. I mean, there's just a lot we can go into it. And
taxing them at a higher rate than other people would be theft, or it would be
how then did
inequality.
I mean, if that's true, then how did liberalism end slavery, and how did liberalism end Jim Crow? I mean,
so here's an answer. Liberalism did not end slavery
or Jim Crow, by the way.
How?
I mean, liberalism was around while those things were ended, but the struggles for the ending of those things required illiberal forces, such as slave revolts, such as slaves escaping. And you might say, like, my liberalism is a liberalism that assumes that anyone in slavery has the right to escape. Well, that's nice, but the people who conceived of liberalism at that time did not agree with you. So at that time, it was illiberal for a slave to escape. And then you have people stealing other people's slave. There's the famous Huckleberry Finn example, like helping a slave escape is theft under liberalism.
I mean, the Fugitive Slave Act is the worst thing this country ever did, in my opinion.
Sure, and it was completely liberal. It was those were the rules there.
Yeah, liberalism allows itself to fuck up horribly in ways that correct itself. That's exactly what happened. It allowed this law
of correction.
It allowed this law to happen, which caused all sorts of reactions. Like the fugitive slave law is probably what caused the Civil War. It's the thing that pushed people to be abolitionists. And
maybe, but like there were abolitionists before that. But
yeah, there were, but it was not a serious movement until that moment. I mean, it was serious, but it wasn't as big a issue until then.
In any case, the slavery wasn't sort of like voted out. There was also a war. There was also, again, slave revolts, Jim Crow. You know, in the end, like the end of the struggle, liberalism kind of comes at the end and legislates it, and then says like, "Look, we did a liberalism to it." But before that happened, you know, Rosa Parks had to break the law. A lot of people had to like.
So what alternative would you propose instead of that?
That's not the point.
No. I would, but I'm allowed to ask the question because to me the point is liberalism has answered this question better than anything we've seen so far.
So it's a really good question, and again, like we can make it a discussion about that, but I just want to reach at the point that like saying liberalism just solves problems is naive. Like that's my only point.
It's not liberalism solves problems. Liberalism allows for problems to happen in ways that make it potential to self-correct.
But these problems are not problems that were self-corrected by liberalism. These are problems that were corrected by struggles that were illiberal. The struggle against slavery abolition was a struggle against the law, against law enforcement, against the fair rules of play, against the Constitution,
against illiberal laws
everything.
by your own definition. All men are created equal. They were using liberal values to push to explain why they weren't following the law. I mean,
I kind of hear what you're saying, Jimmy. Like liberalism, it's like democracy, right? It's not perfect, but it's the best we've got.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's one of the problems with liberalism is just we can't agree on how to define it. Like, are states' rights liberalism, or is liberalism abolition? And that's the problem with the movement at the moment, right? With social justice.
Exactly. We're constantly
Is free speech liberalism, or is my ability to live a life without fear of being oppressed, is that liberalism?
That's exactly how I feel. It's the same way I feel about truth. Truth is something that's approximated. It's a thing that people figure.
Let's not talk about
I'm
this.
just making an analogy. It's to go to his point. I can't to Funkaloid.
Peter.
To his that is how I see it. Liberalism is a struggle to figure out what liberalism is.
That's okay.
Well,
I'm just like, these are the questions that should be addressed if someone wants to say, like, these people are what they're basically saying in this chapter is these people are idiots. How have they not considered like the ultimate solution, liberalism? It just solves all of their problems. And to make that case, this very hard case, what we actually have to do is first properly read and address actual critiques of liberalism. And that's the thing.
I didn't read it that way. I understand why there would be issue with it if it was that. Maybe that is what they meant. I didn't take it that way. I took it more as these people are illiberal. And liberalism is like it would make no sense for America to get behind an illiberal anything.
So
it won't happen.
Again, sure, to make that case, you have to address the arguments for, let's call it very broadly, illiberalism. I'm not sure that illiberalism is what every one of these people is espousing, but so like
I agree with you. I'm with you. I don't think they are. But the point would be to make an appeal to liberalism, just like in the past. Just like say, based on liberal values, we're failing here. We're failing. But you make an appeal to liberalism. Otherwise, you're going to be the only alternative is illiberalism.
So the problem is that, first of all, a lot of these people do make an appeal to liberalism. I'll like slip you a little piece of information. Most of the people they cite there, those critical race theorists, most of them are liberals. Most of them like appeal to liberal values, talk in a liberal way. They publish books, which is a liberal way to affect things.
I don't disagree with you there. I do. I'm totally on board with the way they have framed the actual theorists, the actual philosophers is just not fair. But I mean, getting somebody deplatformed is just it is going to only hurt. It's only going to make it worse because that's illiberal. If you want to protest it and explain why the things they're saying are illiberal, or why why it's harmful to liberal values, you will get so many people caring to hear why. But if you take an illiberal approach, you're not going to convince anybody, except those who want to fight.
I see what you think that, but again, there are counter arguments, and they should have been addressed if that's the thing the book is doing. I feel like the book isn't really defending this point. It just invokes it. I'm now not exactly sure why, but so if what it does is invoke liberalism against social justice people, they should tackle like the claims of social justice people, which are, for example, the marketplace of ideas is just like a power struggle. So if you can get someone deplatformed that actually like blocks their ideas, it's not true that like Nazi ideas get blocked by being on the public platform and being ruined. When these people lose their platforms, they become like irrelevant very fast. Richard Spencer has lost relevancy. A lot of people have lost relevancy by being deplatformed. And
I
these are
don't think
claims-
that he lost relevancy by being deplatformed. I think he lost relevancy by people finding out who he was and what he stood for.
I mean, like you should. That's what he says. He says that like he cries about being deplatformed a lot. I mean, that's the thing. These people don't like being deplatformed.
I'm sure
There's the
he
crying
has
Nazi.
been.
Like there are.
I'm sure he has been
There are
deplatformed,
examples
but I don't believe that that's the reason why he's lost relevancy. I think that
Sure.
he's lost
Again,
relevancy because people
it's-
started to know who he was, and just bringing up Richard Spencer now in public is like he's the new David Duke. You know, like it conjures a disgust response because people know who he is, not because people don't know who he is.
Jimmy, what are we doing here?
Apparently torturing you. I'm trying
Like,
to I'm trying to explain how
So many times, like we go back and forth between whether this is like Jimmy's like journal entry or like
that's not fair.
book club.
Dude, that's not fair.
I
That is not
forgot
fair.
what we're even
I am
talking
absolutely
about.
talking about the book, and you know I am. You just don't like the way that I look at things. In what way am I
Are we
not talking about the book? We're talking about liberalism.
Talking about something that.
Okay,
talking
okay,
about-
you are not, I'm going to mute you, dude. You are not allowed to attack a definition of liberalism and then not allow a conversation. You're being illiberal. Are we going to have the conversation, or are you going to try to shut it down when it doesn't, when I don't just agree with you?
Point is that there's a discussion to be had on liberalism, but there are two questions here. There are, do the authors give a consistent, plausible account of liberalism? We look through what they say on liberalism. We try to see if it holds up. Or do we just go into like every man for themselves, defend their view on this topic?
I'm not trying to defend my view. I'm trying to defend how I read this, how I think they mean it. And if you listen to other things they talk about, I don't think I'm wrong. I am critical of some of the things they're saying. I'm critical of this idea that that liberalism is just an innate value. I don't agree with that. I'm critical of the idea that like with liberalism and the correct science and what, like, they're making a religious argument here and not acknowledging that it is such. They're not even acknowledging that it has a meta narrative.
I mean, I think that was our entire point. So the entire point is that they just invoke liberalism, they don't protect it, and it's at least not tautological that liberalism is the right way to go. So if you want to like make that, if they wanted to make that case, they should have like brought up some objections, torn them down. Like that's how you discuss how good liberalism is. They don't do that. I think, like, I don't think if we make this a discussion about liberalism, yay or nay, like that's not supported by the book. The book doesn't help you understand what liberalism is.
See, I think that that one of the things that the book does do well is cause conversations like this to happen. So that
So Jimmy, on that point, I want to just point out what Ren is saying in the chat. You know, she says, personally, I think we're not talking about the book, but this is probably a more important conversation because I think everyone sort of agrees about the flaws of the book, and maybe it's time to address the underlying concerns the book also fails to address for Jimmy and others.
I completely agree. I mean, every week we're talking about why we agree on what the faults of the book is. So maybe I don't see the point in continuing that.
I mean, then we have two different purposes here. My purpose is to have conversations with people, to discuss and to debate where we disagree, so that someone who's interested in this topic can come and take a listen to these conversations and get a sense of whether they think that this is worth a book worth buying or worth looking into on their own.
That's fair, but I think that we've done even in this even tonight, we've all talked about the flaws of the book. I keep prefacing. I feel like I'm at fucking work right now, making sure everybody knows I'm not racist. Like, I'm constantly prefacing myself to let you know, I'm signaling to you. I know, I'm signaling. I know, I don't agree with the book. Like, the book doesn't accomplish it. But you attack me the second I try to have a discussion about one of your claims. So he's talking about liberalism in a way that I don't think that you are. So I'm trying to discuss that. And I don't see why that's off topic for the book.
He's talking, so the authors are talking about it in a way that you think I'm not. So when I am criticizing them, you think I'm misunderstanding them?
Yes, that's why we're having this whole conversation.
So where do you think I'm misunderstanding them? What part?
That whole thing we just talked about.
Well, I was off the call for a minute because it just froze like right after my computer froze for a minute and I was off. But I mean, were you talking about what you were just talking with the Yanai?
Yeah, that liberalism is not a end state. It is a process. It is a thing. It is a system by which we can resolve.
They say yes. They do. They do say that.
Conflicts.
I understand that. Yes, but presumably it's not just like we start from anywhere and then as long as we're trying to make it better, we can call it liberal, right? Like if I have if I have 20 slaves and then, once every 2 months I pick one who's the most best behaved to set free, that's not liberalism. Is it?
Say it again.
So I have 20 slaves, and once every couple of months, I pick the one who's on their best behavior, and I decide that they are now not going to have to be my slave. They can actually help run the plantation with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm making this more free, less cruel, very gradually. Is this liberalism?
You're talking on a micro scale about something that's macro.
Well, what I'm trying to say, we use thought experiments in philosophy to try to isolate the relevant variables.
It would be more.
What I'm saying here is
a better example would be liberalism is state X makes slavery illegal. Like that's liberalism progressing and then proving that it doesn't that it can work and that it's better that way. And then, or statewide taking some opposite action that doesn't work out.
Was it liberal before it made slavery illegal?
What do you mean?
Because if it wasn't, then why should we even consider these like the same two states in the first? Like, why is it that state X prior to time T1 is identical to state X after T1?
Because it's not objective. It's not objective. We don't know. We're figuring it out. It's a constant disagreement.
No, you're saying that liberalism progresses. So I'm asking, if canceling slavery is a liberal move, does that mean that it was liberal before it canceled slavery and it was liberal after it canceled slavery, and it like canceling slavery is just like one of those good turns of liberalism?
Liberalism is the fact that something like slavery could be stopped.
Okay. So then I do acknowledge that they give that definition, and I was trying to, for the point that I was trying to raise was that this is inconsistent with other definitions they give later on that they seem to rely on. Because if liberalism is just best understood as they say, a desire to gradually make society fairer, freer, and less cruel, one goal at a time. But then later on, they say on page 243 that liberalism has firm tenets of individual liberty, equality of opportunity, free and open inquiry, free speech and debate, and humanism. And it would seem to me that if you have the society where a huge number of the individuals have no individual liberty, one of these criteria
Who doesn't
not
have
being
individual
satisfied.
liberty?
So it's the slaves
Oh, sure. Yeah, but
in a slave society.
right. Okay.
So my point just being that these two definitions, the one I just gave and the one that they gave at the beginning,
Okay,
would
but
be
did
inconsistent then.
at the onset, did that make more people have more freedom or no?
At what onset? What do you mean?
When the statement was uttered, all men are created equal. Did that situation progress more people towards liberty? Did it create the situation where we
I
could
don't
end
even
slavery?
know how to answer that question. I don't know how to even begin to think about how I would answer the question of whether an utterance at a specific point in time.
Okay, no, the point being, step one, all men are created equal. Is like just making that a thing that a country values at its core is an incredible move forward. And a lot of people.
I didn't say it wasn't. But what I'm saying is, I'm just trying to point out that they give at least two here, just highlighting these two definitions of liberalism, where given the same scenario, according to the first, this would count as liberalism, and according to the second, this would not count as liberalism.
What?
So a slave society.
Mm-hmm.
We have many people enslaved. These slaves have no individual liberty. They have no equality of opportunity. They don't have free speech or debate. And it would be pretty fair to say that humanism is not being applied to these slaves at this point in time.
Sure.
Right.
What was the
according
state
to the
before
second
that?
definition here? The state has just been founded, and it's been this way for a couple years, let's say. Okay. And so this state right now, right, as it has existed, according to this second definition that they give on 243, I think clearly this state I'm describing would not be a liberal state.
Does it allow
According to the
itself?
second definition.
Does it allow itself to end that situation?
I think that is not relevant.
No,
because
it's
these
paramount.
are firm tenets.
No.
What that is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Why is it not sufficient?
Because you could have a child sex trafficking ring that allows itself to no longer be a child sex trafficking ring.
Okay, that's why I asked what was the state of the world before this? Was slavery just a thing that was happening all over the world?
So now this is relevant. Is the rest of the world's moral standards?
No. Where you came from matters.
Okay.
No, okay, wait, because like I think you guys are not understanding each other, because like Sam is saying there are two, like the book gives two separate definitions of liberalism. One takes into account whether things can be better or not, and the other one doesn't. And those two are like, the way they give those two separate definitions are mutually like inconsistent with each other.
But what I'm saying is, no, even if the second one does acknowledge that things can get better, it's not sufficient for calling it a liberal society that it allows itself to get better. There are these necessary conditions, these firm tenets of individual liberty, equality of opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, they also discuss other people's discussions of liberalism, and they say this is also a good way to understand liberalism on 244, opposition to illiberalism. And they cite this author who gives 4 themes: acceptance of conflict, resistance to power, faith in progress, and respect for persons. Now, I take it that if a society on a very large scale is not showing respect for persons, then we wouldn't want to call it a liberal society.
Is it moving towards creating more freedom for those people, more respect for those people? Does it allow itself to correct that problem?
Our fundamental disagreement is that I don't take that question to be relevant for these definitions,
This
and you do.
thing
You think that to
about
be sufficient if you say yes to that.
this thing about moving towards liberalism and making things more free is basically the same line of thinking behind the Soviet Union and their move towards socialism. Like, it's the same justification, same line of thinking.
Here's what I sort of think as far as like when something liberal or not. All right, so I feel like in the context of when the country was founded, since this hypothetical state is basically just to stand in for actual like the American starting point, you might say, for example, that democracy compared to the sort of monarchist colonialism from which America sprang forth, that the democracy itself, however limited, was a more liberal step from the monarchism. But then within just the range of possible democratic systems, America starting out was not the most liberal one. And it probably didn't actually get there like anything we would call recognizably liberal until maybe the late 19th or early 20th century. And even then, it was only, if it was liberal, it was, by a hair or so. We're at a point now where the actual liberal mechanisms in the